The psychology of manipulation in everyday life. The question you never thought to ask. Have you ever agreed to something and then wondered later, how exactly did that happen? You didn't plan to say yes. You weren't even sure you wanted to. But somehow, by the end of the conversation, you had committed. You had given ground. You had walked away from what you actually wanted and handed someone else exactly what they were after. And the strangest part, you can't quite point to the moment it happened. That experience, that quiet, unsettling gap between what you intended and what you ended up doing, is not a coincidence. It is not a personality flaw. And it is certainly not stupidity. It is the result of something far more systematic, far more deliberate, and far more present in everyday life than most people ever realize. Today, we are going to talk about the kitchen table, the office meeting room, the text message you read 3 times, trying to understand why it made you feel so bad, the conversation with a parent, a partner, a friend, a colleague that left you somehow smaller than when it began. We are going to talk about the invisible architecture of influence, how it's built, why it works, and most importantly, what you can do about it. This is not a guide to becoming manipulative. This is a guide to becoming awake. Chapter 1: Defining the Territory, Influence versus Manipulation. Before we go any further, we need to draw a line. Because not all influence is manipulation. And if we blur that distinction, we will spend our lives suspicious of every kind gesture, every persuasive argument, every moment of social pressure, and that is not freedom. That is paranoia. Influence is something every human being engages in, every single day. When you make a logical argument to change someone's mind, you are influencing. When you express your feelings honestly to encourage someone to reconsider their behavior, you are influencing. When you present evidence, share your perspective, or appeal to someone's values, you are influencing. Influence is open. It gives the other person accurate information and then respects their freedom to choose how to use it. Manipulation is different in one fundamental way. Manipulation bypasses a person's rational agency. It doesn't offer real information, it distorts, omits, or fabricates. It doesn't invite genuine emotional connection, it exploits emotional vulnerability. It doesn't respect freedom of choice, it engineers a specific outcome without the other person's full awareness or genuine consent. Dr. George Simon, a clinical psychologist who spent decades studying interpersonal behavior and character disturbance, defined manipulation as the use of indirect, deceptive, and underhanded means to get what one wants. 3 words in that definition deserve our attention. Indirect: the manipulator rarely states what they actually want. The true goal is hidden beneath another layer: concern, logic, humor, affection. Deceptive: something false is being presented as true. A feeling is being performed rather than felt. A gift is given with invisible strings. A compliment contains a hidden hook. Underhanded: it operates below the surface. It is designed specifically to work without being noticed. And here is the detail that makes manipulation so uniquely dangerous. It almost always arrives dressed as something else. It arrives wearing the costume of love, of reason, of friendship, of helpfulness. The packaging is familiar. Warm, even. Which is precisely why the thing inside it is so hard to detect. Now that we've drawn the line, let's go deeper. Let's look at why manipulation works at the level of the human mind itself. Chapter 2: The Human Mind as Both Target and Tool. To understand why manipulation is so effective, you have to understand something humbling about human cognition. We like to believe that we think rationally, that we weigh evidence, consider consequences, and arrive at conclusions through careful analysis. The research, however, tells a very different story. Decades of work in behavioral psychology and cognitive science, pioneered by researchers like Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, Robert Cialdini, and many others, has demonstrated with remarkable consistency that human decision-making is riddled with systematic errors. Not random errors. Systematic ones. Predictable patterns of distortion that occur reliably across cultures, across education levels, across demographics. These patterns are called cognitive biases, and they are the primary entry points for manipulation. Let's examine the most important ones. The reciprocity bias. Human beings have a deeply wired compulsion to return favors. This is not a cultural habit. It is neurological. Anthropologists have found reciprocity norms in virtually every human society ever studied, suggesting that the impulse is evolutionary. It helped early humans cooperate and survive in groups. When someone does something for us, we feel an almost automatic pressure to do something in return. This feeling is real, visceral, and uncomfortable when unresolved. We are wired to dislike being in debt to another person. Robert Cialdini, in his landmark work Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, identified reciprocity as one of the 6 foundational principles of social influence. And he demonstrated something important. The reciprocity impulse can be triggered even by favors we didn't ask for. Someone gives you a gift you never requested. Someone does you an unsolicited favor. And suddenly, without having agreed to anything, you feel obligated. This is the entry point for reciprocity manipulation. The gift is real. The favor is genuine. But it was given not out of generosity. It was given as an investment with an expected return that was never discussed and never consented to. The feeling of obligation it produces is equally real. And that feeling is then leveraged to extract compliance. Think about how this might show up in your own life. Have you ever received an unexpectedly lavish gift from someone who then needed a favor? Have you ever felt pressured to agree to something simply because someone had recently done something for you and saying no felt ungrateful? That discomfort you felt, that's the reciprocity bias being activated. And someone who understands this, consciously or intuitively, can pull that lever with precision. The sunk cost fallacy. Here is one of the most powerful traps in human psychology. And it operates almost entirely beneath our awareness. The sunk cost fallacy is our tendency to continue investing in something, time, money, energy, or emotional commitment, simply because we have already invested so much, even when the rational course of action is to stop. We feel instinctively that abandoning something we've invested heavily in means that the investment was wasted. And we cannot tolerate that feeling. So we keep going, we keep giving, we keep hoping. This is why people stay in jobs that are clearly going nowhere. Why do people remain in relationships that have long since stopped being healthy? Why do people continue down paths that the evidence has been questioning for years? And it is exactly why manipulation often becomes more effective over time, not less. The longer you've been in a dynamic, the more you've invested, and the harder it becomes to walk away without feeling like you're writing off everything you've given. A sophisticated manipulator doesn't need to do their best work at the beginning. They just need to get you invested. Once you're in deep enough, the sunk cost keeps you there more effectively than any direct pressure could. Confirmation bias. Our minds are not neutral processors of information. They are meaning-making machines with strong preferences, and one of the strongest is the preference for being right. Confirmation bias is our tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information in ways that confirm what we already believe, and to discount, dismiss, or explain away information that contradicts it. Once we have decided that someone is trustworthy, good, loving, or well-intentioned, we unconsciously filter our experience through that belief. Warning signs get rationalized. Inconsistencies get explained away. We give the benefit of the doubt, not because the evidence warrants it, but because doubt is uncomfortable and the story we've built feels stable. This is why manipulative people so often invest heavily in the early stages of a relationship, in creating an overwhelmingly positive impression, a powerful sense of connection, a feeling of being deeply understood. That early image becomes the template through which all future behavior is interpreted. When the behavior becomes problematic, confirmation bias whispers, "But you know who they really are." This is just a bad day. This is just fatigue. They don't mind it. Remember how wonderful things were. And we listen. The authority bias. We defer to authority. This is almost automatic. Stanley Milgram's famous obedience experiments in the 1960s demonstrated the terrifying extent to which ordinary people will comply with the instructions of a perceived authority figure, even when those instructions cause obvious harm to others. The results shocked the psychological community. They have never been entirely comfortable to sit with. But authority bias extends far beyond formal authority. It applies to anyone who projects expertise, confidence, social status, or certainty. The person who speaks with absolute confidence, even when wrong, is more persuasive than the person who speaks with appropriate nuance. The manager, the parent, the partner who frames their desires as obvious truths, their preferences as reasonable standards, their judgments as accurate assessments, these people benefit from authority bias even when they hold no formal power over us. When someone consistently positions themselves as the final authority on what is true, what is reasonable, and what is normal, and particularly when they do so with calm certainty, they are exploiting our deep-seated tendency to defer to those who seem to know. The social proof principle. We look to others to determine what is correct. When we're uncertain, and we are uncertain far more often than we acknowledge, we scan our social environment for cues. What are other people doing? What do other people think? What is the consensus? This is adaptive in many contexts. Social learning is efficient, but it also creates a vulnerability. When a manipulator can create the appearance of consensus, everyone thinks you're overreacting, nobody else has a problem with this, your friends all agree with me, they are hacking this mechanism. They're presenting manufactured social proof to override your individual perception. And when you're already doubting yourself, as many targets of manipulation are, the appearance of universal agreement against you can be devastating. Chapter 3: The Emotional Triggers, Where Manipulation Really Lives. Cognitive biases are the structural vulnerabilities. But manipulation doesn't just live in the mind. It lives in the body, in the gut, in the part of you that responds before thought has a chance to catch up. Because the most effective manipulation always has an emotional dimension. Always. Let's examine the key emotional triggers that manipulators, again, consciously or intuitively, consistently exploit. Guilt. Guilt is one of the most powerful social emotions in the human repertoire. And for good reason. Evolutionary psychologists believe guilt evolved precisely because it helps maintain group cohesion. It motivates us to repair relationships, make amends, and stay connected to our communities. Guilt, in other words, exists to make us act. A person who understands this, who knows that making you feel guilty is a reliable lever for producing behavior, doesn't need to make direct demands. They simply need to engineer the conditions in which you feel guilty for not doing what they want. The demand is never stated. You feel it in yourself. This is why guilt-based manipulation is so hard to see. There is no explicit request to refuse. There is no clear pressure to push back against. There is only a feeling, heavy, uncomfortable, and urgent, that something needs to be fixed. Common guilt-triggering tactics include the theatrical sigh, the heavy silence, the pained expression paired with "no, it's fine, don't worry about me," the statement that implies sacrifice, "I gave up so much for you," the comparison to a higher standard, "a good friend would have known." None of these are overt demands. All of them produce the same result: fear of abandonment. Human beings are attachment creatures. We are neurologically wired from infancy to need close bonds with other people. The disruption of those bonds, the threat of abandonment, rejection, or exclusion, activates genuine threat responses in our nervous system. This is not a weakness. It is biology. But it is a biology that can be exploited. When someone in a close relationship, a partner, a family member, a close friend, uses the threat of withdrawal as a pressure tool, they are activating this primal fear. The withdrawal doesn't have to be dramatic. A shift in warmth, A period of coldness. The silent treatment. The suggestion, even indirect, that your relationship is conditional on your compliance. These signals send a message that bypasses rational thought entirely and speaks directly to the part of the brain responsible for attachment and survival. And in that state of attachment anxiety, we are extraordinarily susceptible. We will agree to things we would never agree to from a calm, secure emotional position. We will apologize for things we didn't do. We will abandon positions we were entirely right to hold. Shame. Shame is different from guilt, and the distinction matters enormously. Guilt says I did something bad. Shame says I am bad. Guilt motivates repair. Shame motivates hiding. Brené Brown, whose research on vulnerability and shame has reached millions of people, makes this point with precision. Shame is deeply corrosive to self-worth. And a person whose self-worth is compromised is far easier to control. Manipulators who operate through shame, who target not your actions but your fundamental worth as a person, are engaging in one of the most destructive forms of psychological influence. Phrases like "you're too sensitive," "you always do this," "what's wrong with you," "nobody else acts like this," these are not feedback. They are attacks on identity. And a person whose identity is under attack spends so much energy defending their basic sense of self that they have very little left to spend on clear thinking. The desire for approval. We want to be seen as good, as competent, as worthy of love and respect. This desire is entirely human. It is not vanity. It is a fundamental social need. But it creates a vulnerability. We can be controlled by the strategic withholding and strategic granting of approval. This is the mechanism behind what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement, one of the most powerful behavioral conditioning principles ever identified. Originally described by B.F. Skinner in his work on operant conditioning, refers to intermittent reinforcement as a pattern in which reward is given inconsistently and unpredictably. And here is the counterintuitive finding. Intermittent reinforcement produces stronger and more persistent behavioral responses than consistent reinforcement. It's the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. The slot machine doesn't pay every time, it pays sometimes unpredictably. And that unpredictability keeps you pulling the lever long after consistent loss would have sent you home. In human relationships, a person who sometimes offers warmth, praise, and approval, but withholds it unpredictably without a clear reason, creates in the other person an intense and often desperate pursuit of that approval. The target works harder, tries more things, becomes more compliant, all in pursuit of the validation that comes inconsistently and can never quite be secured. Chapter 4: The Major Tactics Named and Explained. Now we get specific. Because manipulation doesn't just exploit emotions and biases in a general way. It does so through identifiable, repeatable tactics. Tactics that have names. Tactics that you can learn to recognize. Let's go through the most common ones. Gaslighting. The term comes from the 1944 film Gaslight, in which a husband systematically manipulates his wife into believing she is losing her mind, including literally dimming the gas-powered lights in their home and then denying that the lights have changed at all. Gaslighting, in psychological terms, refers to a pattern of behavior in which one person persistently causes another to question their own memory, perception, feelings, or sanity. It can sound like, "That never happened. You're remembering it wrong. You're too sensitive, nobody else has a problem with this. You're imagining things. I never said that." What makes gaslighting so particularly destructive is that its target is not your behavior or your choices, it is your perception of reality itself. When someone successfully destabilizes your trust in your own mind, they gain enormous power. Because now you need them to tell you what's true. Dr. Robin Stern, author of The Gaslight Effect, notes that gaslighting doesn't require conscious malice. Some gaslighters are deliberate. Others are operating from a deep, unconscious inability to tolerate accountability, Any suggestion that they were wrong triggers such anxiety that they rewrite reality to avoid it. The impact on the target is equally damaging either way. The research on gaslighting's psychological effects is alarming. Chronic gaslighting can produce symptoms that closely resemble complex post-traumatic stress disorder, hypervigilance, difficulty trusting one's own perceptions, chronic self-doubt, anxiety, depression, and what trauma researchers call identity fragmentation, a fractured sense of who you actually are. Love bombing. Love bombing is the practice of overwhelming someone with affection, attention, compliments, gifts, and expressions of deep connection, particularly in the early stages of a relationship. On the surface, this sounds wonderful. And that is precisely the problem. The purpose of love bombing is not genuine connection. Its purpose is to accelerate intimacy past the natural pace at which trust is built, to create a powerful sense of attachment and obligation before the target has had adequate time to assess who they're actually dealing with. The purpose of love bombing is not genuine connection. Its purpose is to accelerate intimacy past the natural pace at which trust is built, to create a powerful sense of attachment and obligation before the target has had adequate time to assess who they're actually dealing with. Psychologists who study narcissistic personality patterns note that love bombing is one of the most consistent early-stage behaviors observed. The intensity of the attention feels like being chosen, like being special, like finding something rare. It activates powerful neurochemical responses, dopamine, oxytocin, that create genuine feelings of euphoria and attachment. And then, once that attachment is established, the behavior changes. The contrast between the love bombing phase and what follows is itself a manipulation tool. The target spends enormous energy trying to get back to how things were in the beginning, not realizing that the beginning was a performance specifically designed to create exactly this longing. Moving the goalposts. This tactic involves consistently changing the criteria for success, approval, or reward, ensuring that the target can never quite reach the defined standard and therefore remains in a perpetual state of striving. It is extraordinarily effective in professional environments and in relationships where one person holds approval or reward as currency. Just hit these numbers and you'll get the promotion. The numbers are hit. The criteria shift. Just show me you can be trusted with this and we'll talk about more freedom. Trust is demonstrated. A new requirement appears. The genius of this tactic, if we can call it that, is that it can always be framed as reasonable. There's always a new context, a new circumstance, a new standard that makes the shifting of the goalpost appear logical rather than manipulative. And the sunk cost fallacy ensures that the target keeps trying. Because by the time the pattern is visible, they've already invested so much that walking away feels like defeat. DARVO. This acronym, developed by psychologist Dr. Jennifer Freyd, stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. It describes a specific response pattern that manipulators use when confronted about harmful behavior. First, they deny, flatly refusing to acknowledge what happened. I never did that. Then they attack, becoming aggressive, indignant, or wounded by the accusation itself. I can't believe you would say something like that. Then they reverse victim and offender, repositioning themselves as the true victim. After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me. The target, who came into the conversation wanting to address a real problem, suddenly finds themselves apologizing and comforting the person who harmed them. The original issue is buried. The power dynamic is reversed. DARVO is devastatingly effective because it exploits multiple biases simultaneously: our empathy for a person in pain, our social training not to escalate conflict, and our self-doubt when someone reacts to our concern with strong emotion. Triangulation. Triangulation involves bringing a third party, real or imagined, into a two-person dynamic in order to create insecurity, jealousy, or competition. In romantic relationships, this might look like frequently mentioning how an ex used to do things better, or describing how attracted others are to them, or maintaining ambiguous relationships with others while offering just enough reassurance to keep the partner anxious. In workplace or family dynamics, it might look like selectively sharing information with different people, creating alliances and rivalries, ensuring that no one has a complete picture, and positioning the manipulator as the central node through which all communication flows. The psychological effect is to keep the target in a state of mild but persistent insecurity, focused on competing for approval rather than evaluating whether the relationship is worth being in. Silent treatment and emotional withdrawal. The deliberate withdrawal of communication, warmth, or presence, used as punishment for noncompliance, is one of the oldest manipulation tactics in human relationships. Its effectiveness is rooted directly in our attachment system. We are wired to experience social exclusion as genuine pain. Neuroimaging studies have shown that social rejection activates some of the same brain regions as physical pain. The silent treatment is not merely unpleasant, it is, neurologically speaking, painful. When deployed deliberately, not as a natural response to genuine hurt, but as a calculated tool to produce compliance, it becomes a form of emotional coercion. The message is clear even without words: submit or this coldness continues. And because the relief from that coldness, the return of warmth and connection, feels so good, the target learns quickly that compliance is rewarded and resistance is punished. This is, again, intermittent reinforcement. And it creates some of the strongest behavioral conditioning in human experience. Chapter 5: Who is most vulnerable and why that's not an insult. At this point, you might be wondering, who does this happen to? And the answer is worth spending time on. Because the cultural narrative around manipulation victims is deeply unhelpful. It suggests that people who are manipulated are naive, weak, or insufficiently intelligent. That if you were sharp enough, you would have seen it coming. This narrative is not only wrong. It is itself a form of harm. The research consistently shows that the people most frequently targeted by manipulation are not less intelligent or less capable. They often possess specific qualities that manipulators find particularly useful. High empathy. Empathetic people feel others' distress acutely. When someone they care about is in pain or appears to be, they feel a powerful urgency to respond. This responsiveness is a profound gift in healthy relationships. It makes someone a wonderful partner, friend, parent, colleague. In manipulative dynamics, it becomes the primary lever. The guilt trip works best on someone who feels deeply. The silent treatment is most effective on someone who is genuinely distressed by another person's pain. The performance of suffering lands most powerfully on someone who cares about the performer. The manipulator doesn't choose empathetic people despite their empathy. They choose them because of it. A strong sense of responsibility. People who take their commitments seriously, who feel genuinely responsible for the well-being of those around them, who hold themselves to high standards of reliability, these people are extraordinarily susceptible to obligation-based manipulation. Because they already hold themselves responsible for more than they actually are. The manipulator simply extends that sense of responsibility further, into territory it was never meant to cover. A history of conditional love or approval. People who grew up in environments where love or approval was conditional, where it had to be earned, where its withdrawal was a regular disciplinary tool, where their emotional needs were secondary to the adults around them, often enter adulthood with nervous systems that are exquisitely tuned to the threat of abandonment. They are hypervigilant to changes in emotional atmosphere. They are skilled at reading people. They are used to managing others' failings. And they often have an internalized belief, running like background software, that love is something you must continuously earn and can easily lose. This background belief is a goldmine for manipulators. It requires no additional installation. It's already running. Conscientiousness and conflict avoidance. People who value harmony, who dislike conflict, who are uncomfortable with confrontation, these individuals will often choose compliance over the discomfort of pushing back. They tell themselves it's not worth the argument. They minimize their own discomfort to preserve the peace. This is not weakness. It often comes from a genuine and beautiful desire for harmony. But it can be systematically exploited by anyone who understands that this person will retreat before they will fight. Chapter 6: The Workplace, a Particularly Fertile Ground. We need to give special attention to the professional environment. Because the workplace creates conditions that make manipulation uniquely powerful and uniquely difficult to address. Power dynamics are formalized in workplaces. Your manager can affect your livelihood, your professional reputation, your career trajectory. This structural inequality creates enormous leverage. Several manipulation tactics are particularly common in professional settings. Credit theft. Taking ownership of others' ideas, contributions, or work is facilitated by information asymmetry and positional authority. The person with more status has an inherent advantage in disputes about who originated an idea. Strategic favoritism. Selectively rewarding certain employees while subtly undermining others creates competition and insecurity that keeps people focused on pleasing the authority figure rather than evaluating whether the environment is healthy. Manufactured urgency. Creating a perpetual atmosphere of crisis that justifies unreasonable demands, boundary violations, and the suspension of normal expectations is a particularly common management manipulation that extracts enormous labor while precluding the kind of calm reflection that might lead to pushback. Public praise combined with private undermining. Complimenting someone in group settings while criticizing, dismissing, or sabotaging them in private or in high-stakes meetings creates profound cognitive dissonance in the target. The public warmth makes the private undermining harder to name and harder to report. And throughout all of this, the workplace adds a layer that personal relationships don't: financial dependency. Leaving a job is not as simple as leaving a relationship. The economic stakes can be significant. And sophisticated workplace manipulators understand this leverage entirely. Chapter 7: Family Systems and Inherited Manipulation. There is a particularly important dimension of manipulation that we must not skip over. And that is the family system. Family relationships are the first relationships. They are the template through which all future relationships are interpreted. The patterns of influence, communication, and power that we experience in our families of origin become the wallpaper of our inner world, so familiar that we often can't see them at all. When manipulation is part of a family system, it is rarely perceived as manipulation by those inside it. It is perceived as normal, as love, as the way things are. Family systems theorists, including the foundational work of Murray Bowen, describe how dysfunctional patterns in relationships are transmitted across generations, not genetically, but through the modeling of behavior, the reinforcement of certain responses, and the internalization of relational templates. A child who grows up with a parent who uses guilt as a primary communication tool does not think, "My parent is manipulating me." They think, "Love involves this particular feeling of obligation and anxiety." And they carry that equation into adulthood, often replicating it in their own relationships, sometimes as the person who feels guilty, and sometimes, disturbingly, as the person who induces it. This is not destiny, but it requires awareness to interrupt. Specific family manipulation patterns worth naming. The parentified child. A child who is expected to manage a parent's emotional needs, whose own developmental needs are subordinated to the parents', learns that love means caretaking, that their feelings are secondary, and that other people's emotional states are their responsibility. This sets up a lifetime of overresponsibility in relationships. The golden child and the scapegoat in family systems where one child is idealized and another is blamed for family dysfunction, both roles are manipulative constructions. The golden child's worth is contingent on continued performance. The scapegoat's identity is defined by the family's need for a repository of blame. Both learn deeply distorted lessons about love and worth. Loyalty manipulation, the weaponizing of family loyalty to suppress individual autonomy, honest communication, or boundary setting. Family doesn't do that to each other. After everything this family has been through, you're going to. These statements use the genuine and meaningful concept of loyalty as a tool for silencing legitimate needs. Understanding the family system you came from, its communication patterns, its power structures, its manipulation dynamics, is some of the most important psychological work a person can do. Not to assign blame, but to see clearly the water you've been swimming in so that you can choose consciously whether to keep swimming in it. Chapter 8: Recognizing Manipulation in Real Time. Recognizing manipulation after the fact, in retrospect with the benefit of distance, that's relatively manageable. The harder and more important skill is recognizing it while it's happening. Here are the signals, not infallible, not universal, but consistent enough to be worth carrying. Chronic confusion after interactions. If you consistently leave interactions with a particular person feeling confused, not just about what happened, but about what you actually feel, what you actually think, what is actually true, pay attention to this. Healthy communication, even difficult communication, tends to produce clarity over time. Manipulative communication is specifically designed to produce confusion. Because a confused person is a disempowered person. Pressure around timing. Notice when pressure intensifies around when you must decide. I need your answer right now. If you take time to think about it, it means you don't really care. This opportunity won't wait. Real situations rarely require instant, unexamined compliance. The engineering of urgency is a manipulation tool designed to prevent the calm reflection that might lead to a different answer. Your feelings are consistently minimized or weaponized. In healthy relationships, your feelings are taken seriously, not necessarily agreed with but respected as real and worth addressing. In manipulative dynamics, your feelings are treated as one of two things: irrelevant obstacles, you're overreacting, or tools to be turned against you. See, you always make everything about your feelings. When expressing how you feel consistently results in either dismissal or being made the problem, this is not a communication failure. This is a power dynamic. Apologies that don't change anything. An apology is meaningful when it is followed by changed behavior. Without that, it is a performance, a way of resetting the emotional ledger without actually altering the pattern that created the debt. Watch the pattern, not the apology. Notice whether the behavior changes in the days, weeks, and months that follow. If it doesn't and the apology comes again next time, you are watching a cycle, not a repair. Your world is getting smaller. This is perhaps the most important signal of all, and it requires honest self-assessment. Think about your world a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. Were there more people in it? More activities, more ambitions, more dimensions to your life. Healthy relationships expand your world. They support your friendships, your interests, your growth. They celebrate your becoming more. Manipulative relationships shrink your world. They create friction with your other relationships. They consume time and energy that would have been used elsewhere. They narrow your life gradually until the manipulator becomes the primary landscape of your existence. If your world is smaller than it used to be, ask seriously, what has changed? Who has changed it? Chapter 9: How to Protect Yourself, Practical and Psychological Tools. We have named the mechanisms. We have identified the tactics. We have mapped the vulnerabilities. Now let's talk about what to actually do. Protect your support network. Isolation amplifies manipulation. It is not a coincidence that manipulative dynamics in intimate relationships, in families, in high-control groups, consistently move toward isolation from outside relationships. Outside relationships provide reality checks. They provide alternative perspectives. They provide the basic, stabilizing experience of being seen by someone who has nothing to gain from your compliance. Guard your friendships. Invest in them even when it's inconvenient. Be suspicious of anyone who consistently creates friction between you and the people who knew you before them. Keep records where appropriate. This is particularly relevant in gaslighting dynamics, in workplace manipulation, and anywhere that involves disputed memories or contested narratives. Not obsessively. Not as evidence gathering for a case you're building. Simply, when something feels off, write down what happened as clearly as you can, as close to the time as possible. Over time, records reveal patterns that memory alone cannot reliably hold. And patterns are where the truth lives. Trust patterns over performances. Anyone can be charming, generous, or contrite on a single occasion. Character is what someone shows consistently, across time, across varied circumstances, and particularly when something is at stake for them. Watch what people do, not what they say. Watch how they treat people who can do nothing for them. Watch how their behavior changes when they're not getting what they want. Watch who they are under pressure. Time, as always, is the most reliable lens. Seek outside perspective. Therapy, when accessible, is an extraordinary resource for anyone navigating manipulative dynamics, because a skilled therapist can help you see patterns that are invisible from inside them. But even beyond formal therapy, trusted friends, mentors, support communities, any person or space that offers you an honest, caring perspective from outside the dynamic is valuable. You don't need to share everything with everyone. But you do need someone who knows enough to say, "That's not okay," or "Actually, I think you're being too hard on yourself." Human beings are not designed to maintain accurate self-perception in isolation. We need mirrors that reflect reality, not the distorted image that manipulation produces. Chapter 10, the part we don't like to talk about. There is one more dimension of this conversation that requires honesty. Most of us at some point have been on the other side. Not as calculating predators. But we have guilt-tripped. We have withheld affection to get our way. We have moved the goalposts on someone who is trying to earn our approval. We have framed our preferences as other people's obligations. We have made someone feel guilty for having needs. These behaviors don't require malice. They often emerge from fear. Fear of being abandoned, of being inadequate, of losing control in an uncertain world. They emerge from wounds, from learned patterns, from the relational templates installed in us long before we had the awareness to examine them. Understanding this serves two purposes. First, it prevents us from turning the knowledge in this conversation into a weapon of suspicion, seeing manipulators everywhere, pathologizing every difficult relationship, and reducing complex human beings to their worst behaviors. Second, it invites a different kind of responsibility. Not shame as we've discussed, paralyses rather than improves. But accountability. The willingness to look honestly at our own patterns. To ask, am I creating in someone else the experiences I've been learning to recognize today? That question takes courage. But it is the question that changes things. Not just in our relationships with others, but in the relationship we have with ourselves. Conclusion, the practice of staying awake. We've covered a great deal of territory today. We've examined the precise difference between influence and manipulation. We've explored the cognitive biases, reciprocity, sunk cost, confirmation bias, authority, and social proof that create structural vulnerabilities in human thinking. We've felt the emotional triggers, guilt, fear of abandonment, shame, the hunger for approval, that manipulation consistently exploits. We've named the major tactics: gaslighting, love bombing, moving the goalposts, DARVO, triangulation, and the silent treatment. We've explored the particular dynamics of workplace manipulation, family systems, and the transmission of manipulative patterns across generations. We've identified the signals: chronic confusion, shrinking worlds, apologies that change nothing, and the engineering of urgency. And we've built a toolkit of responses: knowing your values, creating gaps between feeling and action, protecting your support network, trusting patterns over performances. That is a great deal to carry. So let me distill it down to one idea. One practice. The practice that underlies everything else. Stay awake. Not suspicious. Not defensive. Not constantly scanning your relationships for evidence of bad intent. Simply awake. Present. Willing to notice what you actually feel, not just what you're told you should feel. Willing to trust your perceptions, even when someone suggests you shouldn't. Willing to ask the honest questions: is my world growing or shrinking? Am I free to be myself here, or am I performing compliance? Do I feel respected or just needed? Manipulation survives in the gap between experience and awareness. It depends on you not quite articulating to yourself what you're experiencing. It depends on the feeling remaining nameless, on the pattern remaining unseen. The moment you name it, even quietly, even just to yourself, the dynamic begins to change. Not because naming something magically fixes it, but because awareness is always the precondition for choice. And choice is the foundation of everything. You are not too sensitive. You are not too trusting. You are not broken for having been moved, misled, or hurt. You are human. And being human means you were built for connection, real connection, freely chosen, mutually nourishing, safe enough to be honest in. That kind of connection exists. It is possible. And the work of understanding manipulation is, at its deepest level, not about defending yourself from people. It is about clearing enough space in your inner life to recognize real love when it arrives, and to offer it with equal clarity in return. That clarity is what we've been building today. Carry it with you. Thank you for being here. For listening with this level of attention. For being willing to sit with truths that are sometimes uncomfortable and sometimes quietly liberating. If something in today's exploration resonated, if a particular tactic explained something you've been struggling to name, if a particular psychological principle illuminated a pattern in your life, let that recognition be the beginning of something, not the end. Take one step. One conversation with someone you trust. One quiet decision made entirely on your own terms. One moment of naming what you feel before you react to it. The path to greater freedom in your relationships is not a dramatic leap. It is a series of small, clear-eyed steps. And you are more capable of taking them than you know. This has been the psychology of manipulation in everyday life. Stay awake. Stay grounded. And remember, clarity is always available to you.